Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Poets and Writers New York Virtual Town Hall. I'm very happy to be here with you all. I'm going to give a brief overview of Poets and Writers and the Readings and Workshops program. Some of you may know this information, but just to sort of refresh you, or for those that don't. And then I will be introducing our guests, Michael and Casey, and then we will have a chance for questions and answers and some conversation about the work that you're doing. And Ricardo will also lead us through a little bit of he will show us the application process. So first of all, I already forgot to say who I am, but you can see my name on the screen. I'm Bonnie Rose Marcus, and I'm the director of the Readings and Workshops Program East at Poets and Writers Exchange. And I'm here with Ricardo Hernandez, who is the program manager for programs and partnerships, and our tech person. So any kind of issues you might have with tech and other kinds of questions or things you want to put in the chat, he's going to keep his eye on that. And of course, I'm here with Michael Czarnecki, poet, and one of our guests, and with Casey Winston, who is the program and outreach manager at the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes. So, Poets and Writers. We have been around since 1970, founded in 1970. And actually, the first program that Poets and Writers what founded Poets and Writers was actually the Readings and Workshops program, a grant program to pay writers to give readings or conduct workshops, and at that time in New York State. Our organization has many other services for writers. Our work is rooted in the belief that literature is vital to sustaining a vibrant culture. We focus on nurturing literature's source, creative writers. And our mission is to foster the professional development of poets and writers, to promote communication through the literary community, and to help to create an environment in which literature can be appreciated by the widest possible public. We do this through our magazine, which many of you may be familiar with. It's an award-winning bi-monthly publication. We do this through our website, pw.org, which provides trustworthy advice, information, and a lively online community for writers, so do check that out. And through our Readings and Workshops program, which pays fees to writers in New York State, as well as in California and 8 other cities. The Readings and Workshops program pretty much has the same premise that it began with, which was to put money in the hands of writers, to honor the work that writers do, to give value to poets, fiction writers, and creative nonfiction writers for reading their own work or conducting workshops. And we're committed to diversity on many levels. The diversity of venues and organizations where our programs take place. So we have funded events at more traditional types of places like libraries and cafes and universities, but also in homeless shelters, treatment centers, prisons, hospitals, with veterans, with cancer survivors, basically any organization or venue or community that wants to host a literary event and has the ability to do so, we're open to receiving an application from them on behalf of the writer. We also, really keep our eye on funding a diversity of writers, all ethnicities and ages, and also writers at different points in their professional development. So we fund writers that are emerging, as well as writers that are well-known and professional and have many, many publications, but we also fund writers who are starting out, who may have self-published books or may have venues where they've read their work. We also prioritize working with underserved communities, underserved counties, which I'm sure Michael will talk about in his talk. We try to fund all 62 counties in the state of New York, and basically communities that don't have access to working with writers. Our application process, we've tried to keep it simple. Basically, organizations or venues apply on behalf of a writer for them to give a reading of their work or conduct a workshop. And although these applications come to us from the organizations, we encourage writers to initiate this on behalf of themselves. And we will hear more about our application process later in the evening when Ricardo shows us the application and some of our toolkits. So I think this is a good segue to introducing our guests. And one thing I want to ask, which would be very helpful for all of us, is how many people here have never received a grant or never applied for a grant from Poets and Writers? And if you would just raise your hand, that would be helpful. I'm gonna see if I can go to gallery. So no one. Okay, I can't see the hands of the people that aren't here, but oh, Mickey. Oh, Mickey, right. We communicated. Okay.
Sally raised her hand. I think
Sally
Robin's
raised
got her hand up, I think.
Okay, great. And what about, and then also just to sort of have a sense of who's here, how many here, and maybe there are people here that wear two hats, but how many people here are writers? If you would raise your hand. Okay, and how many here people are representing organizations or venues that put on literary events? Yay, Casey. And how many wear both hats? Okay, great. Okay, good to know. So I'm going to introduce Michael, and then Michael is going to talk to us about his experience and journey working with us, and tips and advice he might have for you, and anything else he thinks would be helpful to share to all of you. So I'm going to just give Michael a little bit of an introduction here. Michael Czarnecki has been writing poetry for over 50 years and has made his living solely through the creative word for nearly 3 decades. FootHills Publishing is a small press that Michael started, now in its 37th year. He's given hundreds of readings and facilitated scores of workshops throughout the country. 2 of his many published books include Never Stop Asking for Poems, a collection of selected poems written over 35 years, and 20 Days on Route 20, a Haibun account of his journey on the longest road in America. When not on the poetic road, he lives on Wheeler Hill in the southern tier of New York. And I will just say just a couple of personal things. I have been at Poets and Writers now for, it'll be 22 years in July. And I've known Michael, he's been a writer that's been funded through us for all those years. And what we've benefited, I think the mutual benefit that's happened is that, some of the rural counties are very hard to reach in terms of having events there. And we want to have an event happen as much as we can in every county. And Michael has kind of been a person that's taken it on to like plow through or pioneer finding places in rural counties that would apply to us. And so it really benefited him and it benefited us. And so I just really thank Michael for all his wonderful work, especially in those counties that we've had a hard time reaching. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. And it's a mutual appreciation. I say the same thing from my end, that really Poets and Writers has helped me out a lot, and I know I help Poets and Writers out a lot. So it's a perfect relationship, And Bonnie, who was the names sometimes escape. Who was in your position prior to you? Do you know who that was?
I am blanking out, so I can't tell you now. It's been a long time.
So have I been blanking out. Yeah. I was hoping you'd help there.
Sorry.
But yeah, so Bonnie's been 22 years with Poets and Writers. I've been associated with Poets and Writers longer than that, 30 something years. But when you asked me to be part of this town hall, Bonnie, I was trying to think what would have been the first relationship I had with the Readings Workshops program. And I really couldn't recall. The very first featured reading I ever gave was 1986, and it was Hornell, Poets Theater. And that may have been a Poets and Writers funded event, but I'm not sure. But certainly I know by the mid-'80s, I was definitely, beyond that, getting involved with more readings. And also I requested, I was a host. I was a sponsor for readings too, back starting in the late 80s too. So, and Poets and Writers has just been this wonderful organization. Bonnie was the first person, even though I've done work with Poets and Writers for over 30 years, 35 years maybe, I never met anybody from Poets and Writers until Bonnie came to Elmira, and there was an informational meeting there, and it was really wonderful to finally connect with somebody from Poets and Writers. You know, I would just have these applications and response forms, and so it was really nice to connect in person with somebody. And since then, I've met Elliot Figman, and some people out in California too, Poets and Writers. I like to consider myself an encourager. I'm a poet, a writer, small press publisher, and an encourager too. And one of the things Bonnie talked about, she mentioned already, is the rural counties, those places that, you know, not Buffalo. I grew up in Buffalo, but I haven't lived there for a long time. You know, Syracuse, Rochester, Albany, New York City. I tend to I do work in the cities at times, but I really have focused my work in the rural areas. And that's something that I live very rural, very remote here on Wheeler Hill, and I'm drawn to that type of a place. And like Bonnie said, the rural areas don't necessarily get enough attention, you know. And one of the things that happened pretty early on with Poets and Writers, and this was before Bonnie was there even, like Bonnie said, the P&W wants to fund all 62 counties in New York State. And it would get to be about halfway through the fiscal year, which before was July 1st to June 30th. And I would get, you know, an email from whoever the predecessor was of Bonnie, so we can't remember the name right now, and saying, you know, Michael, we don't have work in these counties. And she'd give me a list of counties scattered throughout the whole state. And I'd go to work. I'd start, okay, let me see where I can book some programs. And that was, I love the booking, no, not as much as doing the readings, but I enjoy the booking part of it too, just like I enjoy planning journeys. And, you know, I would go check out the counties, you know, okay, what county, and then I would do a little search. And I always did, you know, a bit of research there. I would, okay, say, this county, then I would go usually to Wikipedia, and you could go to the county, and they'll list the communities in the county. And okay, what communities are of at least fair size? I mean, there's one county, Lewis County in New York. The biggest town in the county is like 6,000 people. You know, and it's always been a difficult county to book programs in, but I've been able to do that at times. But that's the largest community in that county. But I would go and, okay, what communities, you know, are possibilities? And then I would, okay, I'd select a community to maybe start with. Then I would go to the web page of the library. Usually I work with libraries, not always. I've done a lot of work with various, you know, venues and various hosts, but libraries are one of the focuses first for me. And I would go to the library's webpage, see what kind of events they've maybe put on, find out who the director is, and then make a phone call. And I would always ask for the director, and if the director wasn't in, I never left a voicemail. I learned that you leave a voicemail, you usually don't get called back, you know. So I would always call and then call back until I got a hold of the person. And the way, and since a lot of you are writers, I'll explain my process of what I would do then. So I finally get a hold of, say, the director of the library, and I would introduce myself. You know, I'm Michael Czarnecki. I live over in Steuben County, and I'm a poet, writer, publisher. And I would always start with this kind of a question. I was just curious if you would be interested in considering hosting a literary event. Just considering hosting. And that's a big difference saying, would you like to host a literary event? You know, would you like to consider hosting a literary event? And more often than not, there would be a yes at that point. And then they'd like to hear more. And I said, well, I can do various things. I can conduct workshops. I can do a creative nonfiction storytelling. I give poetry reading. You know, I can do a range of things. And then, you know, we would talk about that. And just recently, And this library was going to apply for the Poets and Writers grant, but they were way too late, so they're just doing this without. But I was talking to a director I'd never talked to before up at Saranac Lake, and I mentioned what I could do with readings, and I said a couple of workshops, and I said one of them was a haiku workshop. A haiku workshop, and he got all excited, wow, yeah, because he writes haiku. That would be great, terrific. So we're going to do a haiku workshop there. And I find it's really beneficial that I can present a variety of different kinds of programs, and that really helps. So once, then I talk to somebody, we talk about maybe what they'd be interested in doing, and then the question comes up from them: how much do you charge? How much, and libraries are, one of the things I say about libraries, they're one of the two great institutions in America. One of the two great institutions in America. Somebody once asked me when I said that, a library person, "Oh, what's the other one, Congress?" And I said, no, not Congress. But I like to say national parks. National parks and libraries are just two wonderful blessings we have in this country. And so they ask about that, and I say, well, actually, Poets and Writers is a wonderful nonprofit organization in New York City that would be interested in possibly funding a literary program here. And often the host has never heard of Poets and Writers, or they've heard of them but never applied. So then I explain, it's a real easy application. And, this goes back to the earlier days. It wasn't online. It was all paper and everything, and I say it's really an easy application. And if you like, I can even help you go work through it. And that was really helpful because not everyone's good with, doing it, applications and filling out forms. So often I would go over the application on the phone with the person as they were working on putting it in. And I tell them, usually when it's been a new venue, I say Poets and Writers will be excited to have a new venue requesting funding for this program. And so that's how I go about working on booking programs in places I've never been. The other thing that has occurred for me over these years is there are so many places I go to now that I have been before. Once, twice, maybe 15 or 20 times even. And that it's really no work at that point because they've seen what I do, they like what I do. And when I go into a community, I'm not there just to do my thing, give my reading, conduct the workshop, and leave. What I really like to do is encourage something to go on beyond me. Like if I'm doing a workshop and, say there's 12 people that show up. At the end of the workshop, I say, okay, look, all of you, I think you enjoyed this workshop. You're enthused about what I presented. You all took time to be here today. What if you do this once a month and you all get together once a month to continue meeting? And there are places, Watkins Glen, they've had a writer's workshop and a reading series that I helped organize for 27 years now. Penn Yan developed a writers group. There's various communities, Tupper Lake in the Adirondacks, Indian Lake, because I go in there and encourage something to go beyond just this moment. And I think that's really important. That's that encourager in me that, it's not just me. I mean, and just when I say it's not just me, one thing I like to do when I give a poetry reading, I always start out with somebody else's poem, because I think it's really important to honor the tradition of poetry. It may be a contemporary poet, it may be a Chinese poet from 1600 years ago, but I think it's always important to present someone else's work within the tradition also. And so much of the work I've done, these communities, like I said, I'm going to be on the road in 2 weeks. So, Tupper Lake, Rouse's Point, these are small communities that could not put programs like this together if it wasn't for the support of Poets and Writers. And that's and I've seen so many times, one person, I presented a series of workshops, and I ran into this person, one of the people who was there a year later, and he said, "Michael, look at this." And he had a loose leaf binder full of writings of his that came from the workshop that I presented. He said, look at this. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Look at all of this writing I've done. And to me, that's the value of being able to go. And one other, if you don't mind, one other little story. Do I have a couple minutes yet here, Bonnie? Okay. I mentioned Lowville earlier. And small community, 5,000 people, very rural. It's one of the most rural counties in the state, I think. And Poets and Writers funded, I was up there, I think, for 3 days in a row. They funded a series of workshops and a final reading, okay? And again, there was, nice turnout, not big turnouts, but, people were there for everything. This one gentleman who was a little older than me, and this is maybe 20 years ago or more, he came to every single workshop. He was just starting to write, right? And the reading came along. It was the last event was the reading. And, got to the room, and he was the first person that showed up. And he was holding a book in his hand. And I knew just from seeing it in his hand, I knew exactly what book it was. And I go, wow, you have Whaley's translations from the Chinese? How many of you have Whaley's translations from the Chinese, right? This is it's like, wow. And I said, that's a really important book to me. And he goes, it is for me too. And here we are in this 5,000 village, very rural, and he's got this book. And I said, yeah, tell me why it's important to you. He said, my grandmother gave it to me when I was a senior in high school. And I said, wow, what a great grandmother you had. And she gave me the book, and then I joined the Air Force after high school. I enlisted for 3 years. And I was on leave just before the 3 years was up. I was on leave, and I came home, and I was considering making a career of the Air Force. And 1 second, it's just 30 seconds. I'll be right back. That might not have even been 30 seconds. I don't know. I rushed. But so this is the book, Translations from the Chinese, Arthur Whaley. Okay, so he tells me his grandmother gave him this book, and he's home on leave. He's home on leave, considering making the Air Force's career. And he goes, when I was home on leave, I picked up this book. And he goes, I read this poem. And I knew I couldn't make a career of the Air Force. So here's the poem. It's by Yan Qi, written 3rd century AD. It's a short one. It's called Regret. When I was young, I learnt fencing and was better at it than Crooked Castle, a famous general. My spirit was high as the rolling clouds, and my fame resounded beyond the world. I took my sword to the desert sands. I watered my horse at the 9 moors. My flags and banners flapped in the wind, and nothing was heard but the song of my drums. War and its travels have made me sad, and a fierce anger burns within me. It's thinking of how I've wasted my time that makes this fury tear my heart. And he read that poem and just knew he could not make a career of the Air Force. And that's what poetry should do. Poetry should change people's lives. And I don't know if you can feel the passion I'm feeling right now when I talk about things like this. And that's where I'm so grateful to Poets and Writers for having, I could not have had that experience with that person in Lowville if it wasn't for Poets and Writers funding programs throughout all of New York State. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. It's really nice to conclude and hear that poem. Yeah, and thank you for all the work you've done and probably all the people you've touched with your work. And yeah, thank you. So I'm now going to introduce, we wanted to have a writer and a person that sponsors literary events, although I know Casey does some writing too. So I'm going to introduce Casey. Casey Winston is the Program and Outreach Manager at the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes in Corning, New York, and holds a master's degree in museum studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program. A lifetime of museum hopping and travel led to Casey's love of storytelling and the belief that each story is important and deserves to be told. Casey has been hosting literary programs for the past 7 years, including both poetry and prose readings and workshops. Almost all of these programs have been funded by poets and writers. Casey is a prose writer, but has also taken up poetry since she met Michael 7 years ago, and is excited to share her experience with you all today. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and share my story and what we do at the Arts Council, because A, it wouldn't be possible without poets and writers, and B, it wouldn't be possible without Michael. So you're sitting in a room, a Zoom room, with giants in the literary field, and that's like super amazing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience with poets and writers and our literary programs at the Arts Council. So before I came to the Arts Council, I had never written a grant by myself, but I inherited this beautiful program called Poets in Play that was started by my predecessor, Tamar, and Michael just the year before. So one of the first things that I had to do when I started my job as the programs manager was write a grant for poets and writers to support the poet who would be our featured reader at the next month's event. So I totally panicked. I didn't know how to write a grant, and I was terrified. So before I finish the story, I'm sure you're all hanging on with bated breath. Let me just give you a little bit of background on our program, Poets in Play. We hold this program every other month, and before COVID, we held it at a little coffee shop in Corning, New York, and then eventually transitioned to Zoom readings for COVID, and we're just starting to come out of that right now and tentatively dip our toes in the water for in-person readings. So what we do is we feature a published or performance poet for a reading that lasts about 30 or 40 minutes, and we follow that with a Q&A session and then an open mic reading. Over the 7 years this program has been alive, it very quickly became one of the most popular Arts Council programs, and it has been entirely funded by poets and writers. We do like 6 to 8 events every year between readings and workshops. And we would not be able to do that as an Arts Council if we didn't have this consistent funding source from poets and writers. So anyways, back to the first grant I wrote for PNW. I wanted to mention my lack of experience with grant writing because I want to make it super clear that writing a PNW grant is the very easiest thing that you will ever do to support an artist and literary programming in your community. They have made the process super simple and quick. They only ask the necessary questions, and I'm sure Ricardo will take you through all that, and you can see that I'm not lying. It's very true. It takes me about 10 minutes to fill out a PNW grant right now once I have all the information from the poets. And that's actually the harder piece to writing a grant, is getting the information that you need from your artists. So don't let the idea of writing a grant hold you back, or of bringing the idea of writing a grant to an organization if you are a writer. It's very worth the 10 or 20 minutes. It's such valuable programming in our communities, especially rural communities, of which the Arts Council serves Steuben County, Schuyler County, and Chemung County, with like these very small urban centers that's just surrounded by rural communities. So I mentioned that Poets in Play, our program, was started by Michael and Tamar. I quickly realized what a benefit these poetry readings are to the literary community in our area. And that leads me to talk about how the PNW grants have helped my community and my own personal inspiration for literary programming. So PNW grants are to help support readings and workshops, as Bonnie already mentioned. And within that category, I have been able to come up with different ideas for hosting readings and workshops, all of which have allowed me to make collaborations and connections with people and organizations in the communities that I might not have otherwise made. So that's like an excellent sort of like a secondary thing, is the collaborations that come from these programs. Excuse me. So for example, we recently partnered with Tanglewood Nature Center and the Friends of the Chemung River to host a hike and write event. And we held 2 outdoor workshops and went to the Chemung River and the Nature Center. And Michael led us through a nature-inspired writing workshop, followed by time to do some hiking and walking in nature to write our own poetry. It was really cool and it was a lot of fun. And we also did a reading where we featured the poetry of those 2 sessions. And I actually hope to do another one this spring, which Michael will have to talk about. I also worked with a local queer prose writer who facilitated an LGBTQ+ themed writing night to go hand in hand with Corning's first ever Pride Festival in 2019. We've also hosted ekphrastic poetry workshops in our gallery, where Michael has led us through the process of writing poetry inspired by the art in our gallery, which is also really cool because our gallery features local artists. So we had local poets and writers working off the art of local artists. So that was a neat collaboration. We've also hosted several poetry and prose workshops to help people deal with their COVID experiences and their emotions. And that was really, it was very powerful and brought us all together in our grief and in our healing. And we actually held them outside so that we could be together. My point here is that there are just so many innovative ways to expand on what a reading or a workshop could be. And again, I'll mention that all of these programs were funded by poets and writers. We've been able to feature so many unique and diverse voices in the region to help elevate and amplify the stories that may not get a chance to shine. We've created this really safe, beautiful space for people to come and share their words, their grief, their memories, their inspiration, their battles, and so much more. And a poet could say it so much better than me. I'm like still a beginner poet, but it's just this powerful place, this magical experience where everyone is involved. There's amazing networking going on, conversations going on. We just held our first in-person poetry reading last week at a little coffee shop that we haven't used before for poetry. And I mean, we hung out for like 45 minutes afterwards and just talking with each other and making connections and inviting people into the literary community who were just there for the first time. So I really can't overstate the positive effect that these funds from poets and writers has had on our community in terms of being able to support writing programming, creating this network of writers to offer this space to connect with your own words and with those of others. So I do have a couple like tips and tricks to just convey to all of you organizations, or if you're writers, you know, keep these in mind to bring to organizations in case they're as scared as I was about writing a grant at the beginning. So the first thing that I alluded to before is that have all the information that you need from your writer before you start the grant. It's so much easier that way. And you'll see when Ricardo brings up the grant application that there's a lot of information you just need the same type of information for every grant. And what I do is I keep a list of all of those questions that I just send to my poets and writers. I keep it right on my desktop so I can just copy and paste it into the email every time I want to go and apply for a grant, and that just makes things run so much smoother. Yeah, so once you open the P&W application, you'll see the questions. And again, a lot of the ones about your organization are just the same for every application. And what I do is I keep a Word document ready with the answers. So I just copy and paste them right into the application, and it goes super fast that way. I would also say to think about this funding opportunity to be creative and think outside the box, and how you would offer readings and workshops to your community in sort of new and innovative ways. Like I said, we apply for 6 to 8 grants a year from poets and writers. So it's just for 7 years straight, it's just been this constant stream of programming that's been truly wonderful. So lastly, I will just say that Bonnie and Ricardo are an incredible font of information, and they are so wonderful to work with. They want to give us and they want to give you money. So just apply for the grants and ask them any questions that you have. They will be your advocates and your partners in this process the whole way. So I would like to extend my own personal heartfelt gratitude to Bonnie, Ricardo, Poets and Writers, and Michael, because without their support and hard work, I would not be able to do what I do within the literary community in our area. And I am so thankful that we've been able to build up this program and make it something beautiful and connective. So that's all I have to say.
Wow. Wow, thank you so much, Michael and Casey. I learned a lot, Casey, from, I mean, Michael, I know a little better, you know, but I learned a lot from your presentation about how the program has expanded, and that is a tribute to you and your energy as well, you know, to take it on and to make it grow with a lot of creativity. So thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Casey,